You're supposed to laugh more, though. There we go. This is not a time for an anti-tax speech. So, let's quickly summarize the observations here up to this point. We have focused our efforts on structural diversity by the numbers, which I don't believe accounts for true diversity, which is diversity of thought and experience. Our focus on diversity by the numbers has masked a widening gap between the haves and have-nots, and socioeconomic background today determines an individual's access to education. So what are the implications? Well, let's turn first our focus to a group of haves that exert significant control over the diversity dialogue, the executive team and board members of the Fortune 500. And since I'm a member of that group, I can be very candid. Executive teams at the Fortune 500 level are far more monocultural than the pictures of those teams show. You look at the annual report, we look very diverse. You examine our culture, we're very monocultural. Consider how we select company executives and board members. One of the key selections and one of the key factors in the selection process is looking for someone who we're comfortable with. Too often, this is a polite way of saying we want to hire people who think, speak, and behave like we do. Even if we don't look alike, it's okay as long as we talk, walk, and sound the same as each other. So today, when people hire people of color, people of gender, the individuals that are most likely chosen are the people most likely to be like the CEO. As a result, we practice a form of diversity that fluctuates depending on who's in charge, but if you turned off the lights at most companies and listened to the discussions around the room, there'd be very little to distinguish one person from the next. Differences in race and gender would be subsumed by the overwhelming similarities in thought and experience. This is the danger when CEOs prefer people around them that they're comfortable with. They hire candidates who grew up in the same country, who went to the same schools, belong to the same clubs, and generally have similar, if not identical, thoughts and opinions. Go to the right schools, know the right people, have the right opinions, you're hired. Not because you're diverse, but because you're the same. And by the way, if you're a person of color, well, then you're ever so helpful in meeting our little advances on diversity by the numbers. In this unhealthy equation, the numbers may be right, but only because we have an ill-conceived formula. And all the differences that we could choose to focus on, diversity of thought and experience should be at the very top of our list. If all the people at the top of our company come from Ivy League schools or from the company's training programs or from the same fraternities and sororities, where are the unique solutions going to come from? If we're all thinking alike, how do we innovate? How do we introduce new ideas? Successful participation in the global economy requires an understanding of true diversity, diversity of thought, and that has some real implications for how we do business. Cultural seclusion is in fact hurting our companies. We need diverse management team, rich in experiences and representative of our company's business. It's a criticism I've had of my team at Kelly. Just if I use one example, nearly 50% of our business comes from outside of the United States. When I became CEO, there had never been a non-U.S. citizen reporting to the CEO. Doesn't strike me as particularly diverse in terms of range of thoughts and experience. We've reorganized. We now have the head of APAC, the head of EMEA reporting directly to the CEO. But like everybody else, Kelly's got a long ways to go in our progress on diversity. In fact, as I think about the topic, I often ask other CEOs, shouldn't we be looking for people who make us uncomfortable? Do we really want all of our diverse candidates to be just like us? Do we want to turn off the conference room lights and not be able to tell one colleague from the other? Or do we rise to the challenge of the new global reality and dare to choose people who move us outside of our comfort zone? If we are truly going to seek global expansion, we must have global teams with experiences much different than our own. We must expand our minds and our definitions of diversity along with our geographic footprint. So what does it all mean? Well, if we need to move beyond structural diversity, if we're going to stave off the strictures of a two-class society and shake up the mix of our executive teams, we have a lot of work to do. First, we better realize we've run out of time. The American mindset is only partially relevant today in the global economy. Global business is a fact of life, and no matter what you thought about some of the stats in the first part of the speech, the world has changed. It's not going to stop no matter how much we want it. And that change will be inside the U.S. as well as outside. Just one statistic, immigrants and their U.S.-born relatives will drive a stunning 82% of our population growth over the next few decades. We are going to become globally diverse within the borders of the U.S., like it or not, and the issues that we face in the global marketplace will come true even for those companies who only have an American footprint. No one is unaffected. Companies who have operations only in the U.S. are not immune to the global economy. Even if you're not moving your operations out into other geographies, your future customers and employees and shareholders are moving from those geographies to the U.S. at a faster rate than ever, and bringing their culture's definition of diversity and inclusiveness with them. So the challenge is then that companies today must reconsider, redefine diversity. And for most U.S. companies, this is difficult. American companies are finding themselves in unfamiliar territory, not just geographically, but ideologically. We like to believe in diversity. It's the right thing to do, but we have been growing up in corporate America believing in diversity within very narrow confines, and we have got to broaden our definitions a lot. Labor policies and laws are changing around the world, and now as we look at diversity, we've got to cope with an increasingly complex set of labor regulations. Until now, most of us in this room have thought about diversity only within the confines of our own continent. But defining diversity by U.S. standards is defining diversity too narrowly. How is it viewed outside of the U.S.? We always tend to think that the Europeans and others are much further ahead than us on these social issues, and the fact is that while 83% of EU companies agree that diversity makes great business sense, less than half of them say they haven't even started figuring out what a company's diversity policy should be. Well, how do we go about handling cultural disparities, in fact, in other parts of the world, because they haven't figured it out? In most countries, ethnic diversity is only a part, and often a small part, of the equation. Religion often plays a more important role, and American companies usually freeze whenever you introduce the word religion into diversity conversations. Geography trumps both. Right now in the U.S., we don't recognize religion in our diversity efforts, and we definitely don't include geography, and we don't achieve our diversity targets if some Michigan company hires an Ohioan, or if a Baptist is promoted, but a broad equivalent differences constitute diversity. And when you look at how it affects a very important aspect of growing managers, as we rotate managers through international assignments, these become very difficult. How do we rotate women managers through important parts of the world where women are legally second-class citizens, or to countries where discrimination against African Americans is legal and accepted? Or how do you deal with France, where ethnicity is not a legal concept? You're French or you're not French, which we understand, but that's about as far as diversity goes. Just as we must select leaders with cultural acuity, we've got to learn to develop, in fact, culturally literate teams that can leverage all of the styles around the world to achieve business results. Only then can we begin to create companies whose global nature extends beyond simply having a multinational revenue stream. I've talked about many facets of diversity today. I believe it's an exciting and challenging time to be leading a multinational company, except when you have to do earnings releases. As I hope I've shown today, global diversity in the workplace is not just an HR issue or a problem to be solved. It's a mix of background, experiences, skills, and culture that enables a range of viewpoints that challenge traditional thinking. And I believe that where traditional thinking ends, true innovation can begin. We have a comfortable, safe part of diversity, and that's diversity by the numbers, because it's easy to group the diverse people into the various categories, count them up, and report our success. Diversity of thought doesn't lead itself to such clean calculations. What would a global diversity scorecard look like, and how do we measure the diversity of thought? And if you're waiting for the answer, I'm out of time. No. I'm not certain the academic community and those of us in the diverse community are just beginning to work on it. There's a lot of work involved in creating an environment of broader metrics that links a company's diversity program to effective business outcomes and global practices also. But studies are already beginning to emerge out of the business schools that are demonstrating a correlation between companies who get the new diversity of inclusion right and the rewards that they can reap on the bottom line. I believe globalization is not something to be avoided. It's healthy, and in fact, here it's forcing a healthy, if sometimes uncomfortable, discussion about how we've gone about defining diversity in the U.S. There's a lot of question marks, but a few things are clear. Let me leave you then with what I believe are the key challenges that will deliver on the promise of global diversity.